Yesterday night, we all lit the first ner of Chanukah. And when I walked into the yeshiva this morning, beautiful sight, I did not try to count how many Chanukias there are outside, but Baruch Hashem, many. So Ner Chanukah is a zecher to the nes of Pach HaShemen. And today we will discuss a bit the essence of the nes, but first a brief discussion about the essence of the mitzvah. Tone Rabbanon, mitzvahs Chanukah nar ish ubeisoi. And then we have Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, but how do we understand ner ish ubeisoi? What does beisoi mean? Is mitzvahs nar Chanukah necessarily, does it necessitate a bias? And what happens if a person is not in a house? And this year it's especially relevant. Thousands of soldiers will spend some of the nights of Chanukah not being in a house, being out on the field. And I was asked, what do they do about Ner Chanukah? Do they light or not? So does Ner Chanukah necessitate a bias? Chazal say, Madlek al Pesach beisoi mebechutz. B'shas ha'sakona manichoi al shulchonoi. Does that mean that you necessarily need a bias either in the house or outside? So what does the expression Ner Isha Beisoi mean? Source number 2 is the din of Achsanai. Omer Rav Sheshes, Achsanai, Chayav ben Chanukah. Omer Rav Zera, Mireish, in days of yore, Ki Avina Beirav, Mishtatafna Beprita Bahada Ushbiza. Most of the Nasiva Itza, after I got married, Amina, Hashtevai Deloy Tzerichne, the Madlik Alai Begoy Beisoi. As long as there was a bocher, and he used to stay in people's houses, you don't know how much we need to appreciate that a boy that wants to learn Torah today just comes to Torah's Chaim. He has all the comforts he could expect, almost all the comforts he could expect, maybe not all of them. But once upon a time, my late father, and I'll speak about my father soon because Sunday is his yahrzeit. My late father, he was a big Ilui. He was 18, just became 18 when he was deported to Auschwitz. And up to the age of 18, he managed to learn in 5 different yeshivas. He was very curious and a big Ilui, and he wanted to hear different styles and different types of Rosh Yeshivas. So almost every Zman, he went to a different yeshiva. And he used to eat teig. Teig in Yiddish is, they used to eat days. What does it mean to eat days? They slept by Balabatim in the town. There was no dormitory. There was no kitchen in yeshiva. All there was is a beis medrash. And wonderful people that lived in Munkach or in Ungvar or in Santov, different places my father learned, members of the community agreed to host boys. So if the balabusta was in a good mood, you got dinner. If she wasn't in such a good mood, wait till tomorrow morning. Maybe you'll get breakfast. And they used to stay with people. And that's the story of Achsanai. So Reb Zera said, when I was a bocher and I used to stay with people, I was mishtatev bepruta. Baruch Hashem, I got married, but I'm still in yeshiva. My wife is back home. I'm in yeshiva. Madlik and all of bebeisoi. So you don't need to be madlik where you're staying because your wife is madlik in the home and you are yaitza with her hadlaka. So the Pnei Yeshua is the first that compares mitzvahs Ner Chanukah to mitzvahs mezuzah. And just like mitzvahs mezuzah rests on the house, the same goes for Chanukah. Let's have a look at the Pnei Yeshua. Torah Rabbanan mitzvahs Chanukah nere shebeisoi, nere. The Masha neshtana mitzvahs u'mishar mitzvahs shen choy v'saguf, shorechiv al kol yochid v'yochid, the kaimelon, mitzvah bo yoisem b'shluchoi, shana hochi. שאין הוכיח כמצווה, אלא בסומך לשוס הרב, פרסום מנסה, משום כך, הטילו חייבס המצווה כאלוהי, חייבס הבייס. Because the essence of Chanukah's pursuit menisa doesn't rest on the individual, as if it is chayvas habayis. Svar zemes is even more explicit. Yesh la'ayin. Iya mitzvah nerechot b'bayis kamo mezuzah, וכמו שבס, the called shidlik בשם שבס, אף shidlik מי שיהיה, די. ולפי זה אפשר גם שני בעלבתים הדורם בבייס אחד די, להם בנר אחד. So, the Svasemis compares Ner Chanukah to mezuzah. But in my opinion, when Chazal say Ner ish ubeisoi, could anybody remember where is the very first expression, ish ubeisoi? Where do we find ish ubeisoi? First time. Pasuk in Chumash, the beginning of Chumash Shemos. Eis Yankov ish ubeisoi ba'u. Does that mean they carry their houses? No. Ish ubeisoi is everyone with his family. So when Chazal say, Mitzvahs Chanukah ner ish ubeisoi, doesn't mean a house. It means your family. So in Minchas Osher Moyadim, I wrote a very important yesod. All the achronim differentiate. There are mitzvahs hamutolos al hatzibur and mitzvahs hamutolos al hayochid. Most of the mitzvahs are individual mitzvahs. Every person needs to hear shofar, and he needs to have a lulav. Every person needs to sit in the sukkah and put on tefillin and tzitzis. And each and every one of us needs to daven and say Kriya Shema. And there are mitzvahs that are communal mitzvahs, in which the mitzvah rests on the entirety of Klal Yisrael. Mechiyas Amalek, waging war, appointing a king, that's mitzvahs hatzibur. But between the two, there are some mitzvahs which rest on a collective body, on a group of people. Not on Klal Yisrael, not on the individual, but on a group. So the most potent example is Akrovas Karbonos. Who bears responsibility for the Karbonos every day in Beis HaMikdash? A group. Who is that group? Every week there was a different mishmar. And in every mishmar, it was divided 7 days of the week. Each day had a base av. Not every kohen needs to bring the karbonos, but they all bear responsibility that some of them do. The same achilas kochim. Kohenim have a mitzvah, achilas kochim. And if they didn't eat all the kochim that day, it's a bitul mitzvah to say, and it's also a lav of loiso siru. Who bears responsibility for achilas kochim? Once again, same group, Beis Av. Those that are responsible for akrovas hakarbonos, they are the ones that are responsible for achilas kochim. Not every kohen needs to eat, but if the kochim were not eaten, they all bear responsibility, and they're all mevatel mitzvahs to say. Any other mitzvahs that rest on a group? Yes, of course. Yibum and chalitza. When a person passes away and he has no children, there's a mitzvah, yibum or chalitza. Who has that mitzvah? A group. If he has 5 brothers, they're all responsible. Contrary to achilas kochim and akrivas karbonos, in which many could participate together, by yibum and chalitza, it's only one. But who is that one? Any one of the brothers. They all share responsibility. So the Mishnah says it's according to age. But still, they all are mechuyev. There's just a precedent. we prefer the oldest. If he refuses, we go down in the line. So many mitzvahs rest not on Klal Yisrael, but also not on an individual, but on a collective group of people. And that is what Chazal mean, ner ish ubeisoi. Has nothing to do with the house. Ish ubeisoi means this is a collective mitzvah which rests upon all who? Not necessarily a family, people that live together. That is ish ubeisoi. So Bochem, that rented a place, make it a din, one of them needs to be Madik Ner Chanukah. And it's not that he is a shliach and we need shlichus. That is the din. One out of the group. Like Yibum v'chalitza, like Achilas Kodshim. And that is what Chazal mean, Ner ish ubeisoi. But still, do you need a bias or not? So we're at source number 7. Haroy ner Chanukah tzorech levorech. B'shar mitzvahs, this is Toisvus. Yegan lulav v'sukkah lo tiknu levorech leroya. Elo gam ner Chanukah. Why? Why is ner Chanukah an exception? And we do not find berachas haroya merely by seeing a chefzeh the mitzvah, you say a bracha. משום חביבס הנס, וגם משום שיש כמה בני יודם שאין להם בתם והם ביודם לקיים המצווה. So Tosfos clearly says if you don't have a house, you can't be makayim the mitzvah. So obviously you need a house. Why is that? There's a Mishnah in Sukkot of Gimel. Bayis she'ein bo daled al daled. A house that doesn't have Dalet Fochim, Dalet Ames, Al Dalet Ames is not considered a bias. And the Braisa gives us 10 halachas, 10 different halachas. Why is it relevant whether it has a din bias or not? Mezuzah, Tumas Nagoim, Eruv Chatzeres Shetufim Avoyis, Chalukas Shutfim, 10 different halachas. But Chanukah is not one of the 10. So obviously in Chanukah there is no din of a bias. I like words. I like Haggadoros. And I say, for Ner Chanukah you don't need a bias, but you do need Pesach bias. Don't need a bias and you need Pesach bias. Do you remember the Gemara on Shabbos? Chaval al man deles ledarta v'tara ledarta ovid. So what are you going to do with a Pesach if you don't have a bias? Well, when Chazal say Chaval al man deles ledarta v'tara ledarta ovid, it's a moshel to a person that learns Torah, but he has no Yiras Shamayim. But on Chanukah, I say that's a real good Haggadah. You don't need a din bias, because the mitzvah doesn't rest on a house, unlike mezuzah, unlike chalukas shutfim, unlike nigei batim, which is a house. But Ner Chanukah needs to be placed al Pesach habayis. And there is no Pesach habayis, there is no mitzvah Ner Chanukah, which means you could live in a little tent, doesn't have a din bias, doesn't have daladamas al daladamas. What's the minimum you need to be defined as a mukim dira? Who knows? What's the minimal size of a mukim dira? Sukkah. Zayin tfochim al zayin tfochim. That's less than 2 ames. So a bias is only dalad ames. But I think if a person has a little hut or a little tent, it doesn't have a din bias. But he has a Pesach where he goes in and out. He's mochuyev in Ner Chanukah. But he asleep on the open field, you have no mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, like Tosfos says, Misha ein loy bias, ein yochal hakayim ha-mitzvah. So I paskin for thousands of soldiers out there in the field. Many of them sleep in houses. Houses in Gaza where people fled or were killed. Many of them sleep in tents, but many of them sleep out in the field. Those that sleep in a tent, Ner Chanukah with a bracha. Those that sleep in the field, no Ner Chanukah. So the B'Shul Zalman Paskin, if you're all night in a tank, you need to put on an Chanukah, either in the tank, top of the tank. But I say for many reasons you can't light ner Chanukah in a tank. First of all, the Shulchan Aruch says if you light ner Chanukah where the wind is blowing and it's going to be put out immediately, that's a bracha levatala. So people are not supposed to light fire in tanks, and there's an internal sprinkler system. So if you want a good shower, try to put on ner Chanukah in a tank. But I also think a tank is not Pesach Beisoy. It's a vehicle. It's not like a tent. And therefore, no chiyuv of ner Chanukah. So this is a chiddush. The very first Gedolim dealing with a similar question are the Marsham and the Aruch because the first means of land transportation were trains. People used trains far before they invented cars and way before they invented planes. So 100 years ago and more, people traveled in trains, and that was the most efficient way of land transportation. The second best would be a horse-driven cart, and trains usually go faster than horses, and sitting in a train is more comfortable than sitting on the back of a horse. So the Marsham was asked the question, source number 9. Mechtavei miyoim beis de Chanukah, imuter lahadlik ner Chanukah ala ban. Ban is in Yiddish, train. Lo imatzosi adover mavuar, aval halo, mi sheshilem ba'ad kol halayla, have kesoch aloi beis diro. Lechol v'lishen sham, v'chayev b'ner Chanukah. Spend the night on the train, it's like a house. Why? Lechol v'lishen sham. You could sit and eat, you could sleep. Some trains even have, if you're first class, you have a room with a bed. But even if you don't have a bed, you have a relatively comfortable seat, and you could walk around. So the Misham says, if you're in a train, chayiv ner Chanukah. Uma shekosev Rashi b'yoshev b'sfino. Which Rashi does he means? Daf Chof Aleph, haroi ner Chanukah chayiv levorech. Rashi says, what is the situation in which you only see a ner Chanukah, but you're not lighting a ner Chanukah? Yoshev b'sfino. So the Marsham understood this proves that a person that's on a boat doesn't light ner Chanukah, and therefore he can only say Berchas Haroyam. Ma shekosev Rashi Yoshev b'sfino yesh lo mishoyos sfinas psuchois b'lo kirui v'ruach menashev v'lo yehoyo begeder bayis klal. So he says Yoshev b'sfino is a raft or a canoe or a paddle boat. There's no room, there's no deles, there's no Pesach. And that is why there is no Mitzvah of Chanukah. But if it's somewhat like a room, and you could sleep and eat, it's like a train. And a train, chayev b'ner Chanukah. V'avda ban einoi oimed b'mokom echad, v'rochav k'mahalach, lo nimtza b'shom mokom, she'eh tzorech bayis kavua. למה שמצווה עושה בשביל פרסום איניס, כן אלא להניס דייטי מסבורה. So the Mashal just says svora. I don't have a source, and I think the Mashal is exactly what I say. We don't need a din bias, and that's why we don't care that it's moving, that it's not in one place. We don't need a din bias, but we do need yochel lechol v'lishen sham, because that's the mashmos of Pesach beisoy mebachutz. Shasa sakona manichoy al shulchanoi. That means you have a place with a table, with a chair, and therefore chayiv ner Chanukah. Aruch HaShulchan was a contemporary of the Maharsham. Who was the Aruch HaShulchan? Who knows? Who was the Aruch HaShulchan? What? Yeah. Where was he a Rishon or an Achron? Oh, so you also know that the Masham was an Achron because they said they were contemporaries. Yeah, and he was the Rav where was he Rav? In Novardok. One of the greatest Paiskim. So let's have a look what the היוםהשחור says. Nelani is dati. The ato sherov הנסיעס במסילת הברזל. Mesilat Barzel is a train. And as he writes, there were no other means of land transportation. People built ships far before they built trains. And ships are, well, in Tehillim, one of them is Yordayam. רוב הנסיעס במסילת הברזל, וכושר להדלק שם כידוע, יוכל לסמך בפשיט, אסל בעשר שמדליקים שם, אמנם, הלוא לא יראה נרס חנוכה, ולכן טוב שידלק נר אחד בעגולה שיושב שם ולבורך עליו. So the היוםהשחור says, it's preferable to light on the train. Ner echod because they probably won't light a light of nighters. So both the Masham and the היוםהשחור says you could light on a train. What?
Where on the train?
Obviously not al Pesach mebachutz. You might fall off the train. Either at a window, if the train travels in a residential area, or in the train al shulchanai. B'diavad you always yaitza even al shulchanai. So both the Masham, the היוםהשחור, obviously say you don't need a bias, you don't need a din bias, as we proved from Sukkot Daf Gimel, but you do need somewhat of a bias. And so my vote is, you need a Pesach bias, even if you don't have a bias. And that is Pashtus Divrei Chazal.
Rashi's boats were, Rashi didn't have on the boats that Rashi was referring to in the Gemara.
I think the Marsham is somewhat of a doichik. Yosef Besvina, Rashi writes that it was like an open raft. My interpretation would be Yosef Besvina, so he doesn't have any natives. He didn't plan to be on a boat. You know, the boat for some reason just couldn't dock. And he's stuck on a boat, and Ner Chanukah comes. I always argue that, and this week I saw in Perish Rabbeinu Yonis in Miluniel, it's not on our sheet, he writes, Yosef Besvina ve'ein lo ner. And to me, that was the pashtus. You know, Rashi just wants to describe a scenario. Why all he could do is roya, and why isn't he lighting? So it could be because he doesn't have a bias, like Tosfos says, or Yosef Besvina. And Yosef Besvina, and he doesn't have any ner, he doesn't have any shem, and not necessarily that he's potter. And that is what we find in Rabbi Yonis in Miluni. So who was the Tzitz Eliezer? Who knows? Who was the Tzitz Eliezer? Rishon or Nachman? Rav Waldenberg, one of the Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. And he paskins, even if you have no home, you're staying on the field, you're in the middle of the street, you're still achayev lahadlik ner Chanukah. Source 13. And he proves it from Orchos Chaim. Misha bo b'svino, number 12, Misha bo b'svino shu bebeis goyim, madlik bebrochos u'manich al shulchanoi. ולא ידעו מלאכסנאי דאמרין אין די מדלק כל בבייסוי לא יצורך להשתתף, שהנוסם שיש פרסום הנס בדלוקס ושפיזו. But if a person is between goyim and no one lights ner Chanukah, is the only one around, even though madlikin ola bebeisoi, he should light with a brocha. Because if he doesn't light with a brocha, he will also miss birchas haroya. And therefore, madlikin ola bebeisoi, mitzad mitzvah sad loke is potter, but he still could light with a brocha, because the minimum you need in Chanukah is birchas haroya. And that's a chiddush we also find in Shulchan Aruch. In order to say birchas haroya, you have a chiyuv of adlokas ner Chanukah, and you not only say shos anisim, you also say asher kedushonu b'mitzvosav v'tzivono. But in Shulchan Aruch, it is only misha ben hagoyim. Orchos Chaim writes misha bo b'svino. So obviously this proves bo b'svina chayev b'ner Chanukah. So Tzitz Eliezer says you don't need a bias. And once again, I would say bo b'svina, but he has where to stay. It's like a train. He has a room. He has a little bias. It might not have a din bias like abitumas negoim, but still, you know, most svinas in our day, it's a room. So even if you don't have a $10 million yacht, but even if you have a little motorboat, most of them have a room, you have a seat, you have a bench, you could have a drink. So I don't think we could prove anything from Yosef B'Sfina. So Rashi writes Yosef B'Sfina does not light. Orchos Chaim says Yosef B'Sfina does light. Maybe they're dealing with two different types of sfinas. And I would say, same boat. Last year he was stuck. He didn't have any nados. This year he is more careful. And this year he, based on his experience from last year, he took a long nados. And that's why he's lighting. So I don't think there necessarily is a steer or a machlokes between Rashi and the Orchos Chaim. So my opinion once again is, if you don't have a bias, you don't have a mitzvah of Chanukah, like Tosfos says. That is why Chazal were metaken berachas haroya, mishum sheyesh anoshim, yesh b'nei Adam, she'en lehem bias ve'einem yecholim lekayim hamitzvah. It's not reasonable to say Pshat and Tosfos, ein lehem bias, so they don't have a ner. When you're on a boat, it's more reasonable. I didn't take a longer ner, what am I supposed to do? But the fact you don't have a bias, so you don't have, $2 million to buy a house in Yerushalayim, but you still have 15 shekel to buy some shemen and a ner and a psila. So it's clear in Tosfos, ein lo bias, ein yochel lekayim mitzvah. So in my understanding, you don't need a din bias. You could light on a train, you could light on a boat. So I was asked, on a plane, could we light ner Chanukah? And I say, it's a similar question, could I light ner Chanukah in a tank? We need to understand that we need to follow rules that have to do with our safety. So many times I told this bad story. I was once Ben Azmanim in Switzerland. Usually I spend Ben Azmanim Harbotzes Torah in Europe. And the security people in the hotel, as in all hotels, notified all the Jewish families, you can't light ner Shabbos in your room. Everybody will eat Shabbos in the lobby. But amongst us, there is always that single oiber chochem. You know what an oiber chochem is? I think it's in English as well, not only in Yiddish. There are always those people that think they're smarter than all the others. And there was a couple that lit ner Shabbos in their room. And 10:30 at night, the sirens went off, and there was a fire in their room. Not a terrible fire, but the security people took everyone out on the street. 300 people, anoshim, noshim, vetaf, had to leave the hotel in rain and in cold, little babies. And we're dealing with the Swiss Alps. Windy roads, especially in a rainy night. It took 4 hours to the firemen to get there. 4 hours, 300 people, till 2:30 in the morning were standing in the rain, in the cold, because one tzedekis decided, I'm going to have a chumrah, I'm going to light ner Chanukah in my room. So I just tell the story many times to explain you need to follow rules, because these rules were not put into place by anti-Semites that don't want us to be mekayim the mitzvah of ner Chanukah. And the reason they don't let you light ner Shabbos in your room is not because it's the Greeks or the Bavlim that want to tear us away from our mitzvahs. It's just about security and safety and pikuach nefesh. So we need to understand any rule that has to deal with safety and security should be upheld. So today we discussed the mitzvah of ner Chanukah and an interesting shaila and discussion which is relevant to these days.
Flashlight in a hotel? Using a flashlight in a hotel.
No. I know that some Gedolim write that. In my opinion, Shabbos maybe, but Shabbos is about light. Ner Chanukah is a zeicher. And a zeicher needs to be exactly the way Chazal were metaken. And I think we need fire. A flashlight would not be the mitzvah of ner Chanukah. And even if you have a beautiful Chanukiah with electric lights, if you say a brocha, in my opinion, brocha levatala, It's a nice thing to do. Jewish identity, make people feel good and proud with their Yiddishkeit, but it's not the mitzvah of Chanukah. I think mitzvah of Chanukah, which is at the Konas Chachomim, we need to be mekayim the way Chazal were metak and the way Chazal envisioned this mitzvah. Even Shabbos, in my opinion, you can't say a broch on electricity, but Shabbos, it's more reasonable to argue you could, because Shabbos is about light. It's about Kvod Shabbos, Oinig Shabbos, but Chanukah is a zeicher, and a zeicher needs the way Chazal were metak. So Gzeres HaYavonim was la'ashkichom terosecho. And unlike other periods in our history, in a way, B'yamei Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonai Yevonov was a very troubling period. In Mitzrayim, the picture was clear. Everybody knew that Parai is an enemy and we need to get out of here. B'yamei Mordechai ve'Esther, there was no doubt. Everybody knew Haman is a mortal danger and an enemy, and we need to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't so obvious in the days of the Avonim. According to many historians, the majority of Jews were Misyavenim, and Yochanan Kohen Gadol and his family were a minority. And many Jews said, what do you want? The Greeks are fine people. They're not exactly as we are, but, we have what to learn from them. They gave humanity many gifts, literature and poetry, and even democracy, and sports, So why do you think they're so awful? We could compromise, we could get along, and those that were the Misyavenim. And Yochanan Kohen Gadol decides our entire future is in the balance, and this is mortal danger. To the degree we need to fight. And the Misyavenim said, you're mad, you're insane, you're putting the entire people in danger, because whom are you going to fight? The mightiest empire, the Greek Empire. With whom? We don't have a big army. So you're putting everyone in danger. And Yochanan Gadol insists, if we don't fight, then we're gone. We will die. We have no future. The Avonim are as much as a danger as all the others were. So that's the story of Esav and Lavan that Yaakov had to endure. Esav wanted to kill Yaakov, just like Haman. Lavan bikesh lakol es hakol. We don't find that Lavan wanted to kill Yaakov. But when Lavan says, why do you need to leave? Habonim bonai, habonas benoisai. We could stay together. Yaakov says, no, we cannot stay together. Because habonim einam benecho, vabonis einam benoisecho. My children are not your children, and we need to part. We are different. So Esav and Lavan, that is Haman and the Avonim. So Yochanan Gadol declares war. And then Klal Yisrael is zeicher to miracles. Masar to geburim b'yad chaloshim v'rabim b'ad ma'atim. Because Yochanan Kohen Gadol knows, lahashkichom terosecho is the end of our story. So this coming Sunday is my father's yortzeit, 6th yortzeit. My late father was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, a big Ilui, and he didn't want to be Nana Mekvayda Torah, so he was a businessman all his life. I was born in the East Side, and we were neighbors of the Moshe Feinstein. I don't remember the Moshe from my childhood years. I did get to know him later, because I was 6 when we moved away from the East Side to Borough Park, and I don't remember the Moshe. Obviously, as great as I am, but when I was 5 years old, I did not deal with the Moshe in halacha. And I wasn't mefalpel in the Igris Moshe or the Dibris Moshe. Might seem as a surprise to you, but yeah. I was a kid like any other kid in the East Side. And Moshe tried to convince my father to go into Rabbonis. And he told them there's a little town in the Catskills called Liberty. Winter fällt der große Schnee. So the winter, there's a lot of snow. And he told my father, in one winter, you're going to be a Godel B'Torah. Didn't occur to the Moshe, if there's a big snow outside, then you need to become a Godel B'Torah. What are you going to do at home if you can't leave the house? Does anybody have anything to do at home besides learning Gemara? So the Moshe told my father, one winter you're going to be a Godel B'Torah. There's so much snow outside. Obviously, my father wasn't convinced. I don't know why. But he was a huge Talmid Chacham. So my father arrived in Auschwitz the first day, Shavuos 1944. That very same day, he lost his grandparents, father and mother, went up in smoke, and 5 out of 8 siblings. One day later, my Rebbe, the great Kloiser Rebbe, arrived in Auschwitz. Second day, Shavuos 1944. And he lost his wife and all of his 11 children. My father heard that the Kloiser Rebbe is the next barracks, next to the one he was in. In the middle of the night, he sneaked out, which was putting your life in immediate danger, because the Nazis in the watchtowers, if they saw a Jew roaming the premises, they would shoot him and kill him. And my father went into the next building, and in the morning he approached the Klosenberg Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, it would mean so much to me if I could get to know you, and maybe we should be together. And the Rebbe frowned down at him, and he said, Bucher, the mindset that is helfen, said the Gunish helfen. Young boy, if you think it's going to do you any good to be close to me, it's not going to do you any good. My father responded and he said, Avada vetes melfen. Of course it's going to do me good because we could talk and learning. And the Rebbe was surprised and he said, Bocher, you're in Auschwitz, you want to talk and learning? And my father said, of course I do, because otherwise, how will we prevail? How will we survive? And the Rebbe gave him a big hug, and they talked and learning for the next 14 months. And they talked and learning for the next 45 years. And my father was one of the closest people to the Kloiser Rebbe. And I and all my brothers were all Talmidim of the great Rebbe. So my father, as an 18-year-old boy, intuitively felt if we don't talk and learning, we won't survive. As long as we talk and learning, we live. When we stop talk and learning, we die. And that's the famous Moshel of Rebbe Kiva. You all remember the Gemara and Brochus? Rebbe Kiva makal kilis barabim b'shas hagzeira. He's putting his life in danger. And his friend Papos ben Yehuda asks him, aren't you afraid? I mean, the Romans decreed you're not allowed to teach Torah. And Rebbe Kiva says, of course I'm afraid. But I'll give you a mashal. A fox was taking a walk on the riverbank, and he sees fish. They seem to be very agitated, very nervous, nervously swimming around, and he asks the fish, what's happening? Why are you so nervous? And the fish say, don't you see? There are fishermen out there. They put nets in the river, and they want to catch us. So the Willie Fox says, oh, there are no fishermen out here. I don't see any nets out here. So come up. And the fish says, so the fish tell the fox, you think you're so smart? You're the biggest fool in the world. Yes, fishermen try to catch us. But on land, we die, we perish. We are water animals. We can't live on land. So the Rebbe Kiva says, I am afraid. But Torah is mukam chayuseinu. Im nifrosh min Torah. If we leave Torah, we die. And therefore, we need to learn Torah even when we are in danger, because if we stop learning, that is our demise. We can no longer live. And whenever I tell this moshel, I ask the most simple question nobody asks. So the fox tells the fish, come up here and let's live together like our forefathers lived together. When exactly was that? When did the forefathers of the fish and the forefathers of the fox live together on land? Never was. So what is he talking about? If I would be a fish in that pond, I would say, you're not only a fool, you're a liar as well. So what is he talking about, the fox? Well, clearly it's a lie. But if you lie so many times, people will start believing you. And especially if you lie with a straight face. And we're hearing that argument every generation. Different language, different versions, but it's always the same argument. Why do you need to learn all your lives? Can't you just be like anyone else? You know, come up here and just be normal. Just be like all the others. So many times modern fathers that have kids in yeshiva ask me, so when is my son getting the diploma? When will his studies be over? And I say, when will he finish his studies? Well, we hope Yomeshin is saying Shivim Shono V'im B'Gevura Shmoinim Shono, and probably he will finish his studies when Zoysa Torah, Odom Ki Yom Esboyel, Afilu B'Shas Moisa. He needs to learn. We learn. That's our oxygen. That's the way we live. So the fox says, you know, come up here and just be like all the others. And the fish say, we know how to live. We're water animals. You're land animals. You stay up there. And we don't need your clever aitzes, your clever device. We know how to live. We were born in Har Sinai. And the first sight we saw when we opened our eyes was Moshe Rabbeinu v'shtei luchos habris. We're the people of Torah. And without Torah we can't live. And that is what my father felt in his heart in Auschwitz when he told the great Kloiser Maggid Rebbe, we need to learn it, talk and learning, because otherwise, how will we make it? And that is what Yochanan Kohen Gadol knows. And he knows, Lashkicham Torasecha, that is the end of our story, and we need to fight. This is something we cannot live with. Torah is our life. Torah is the oxygen we breathe, and that is what Chanukah is all about. So thank you, Kodesh Baruch Hu, that you're sitting in a great yeshiva. And when will your studies be over? Not when you go back home from Torah's Chaim. That's just the beginning. You know, this is just the beginning. This is just to give you a boost. And you should be learning Torah every day of your life. Lo yomesh sefer HaTorah ze mapicha, v'ogisu bo yomam v'layla. With Shabbos and a list of Chanukah.